He heard the lure of the street at a very early age, at least by the age of 14. He by then had committed to a criminal life. He was out there doing small-time crimes, smoking opium, having a sex life of sorts.
His mother was openly ashamed of him, and he began to call himself Charles Luciano instead of Salvador Lucania, and it was a way of somehow removing the stain from the family.
At the age of 18, Luciano was arrested for possession of heroin and sentenced to a year in prison. His parents did not visit him in jail.
Charlie Luciano's father turned his back on him and disowned him and said, I cannot have a son. I don't want to have a son like you. So as far as I'm concerned, you're not my son anymore.
Luciano soon started his own gang and recruited other young hoods from around East Harlem, including one named Frank Costello. Born Francesco Castiglia in the town of Laropoli on January 26, 1891, Costello was the youngest of Luigi and Maria Castiglia's 6 children. At the age of 4, he and his family boarded a crowded passenger ship bound for America. Space was so tight on board that young Francesco spent most of the voyage inside a large cooking pot. His family settled in East Harlem, a neighborhood teeming with poor Italian immigrants.
They opened a little grocery store in East Harlem, but they had great difficulty making it. His father was ineffectual. He really hated his father.
Instead of his father, young Francesco came to admire the well-dressed men he saw on the street. Men from the old country who had brought with them the traditions of organized crime, secrecy, loyalty, and respect.
If you looked around, there was a certain class of guy who didn't really go to work, but always had nice clothes, who didn't really come from any particular place of power, from the government or a company, yet seemed to command respect. And those were the men of La Cosa Nostra, the made guys.
Francesco dropped out of school when he was 13 to join a street gang. To sound less Italian, he changed his name to Frank Costello. At 17, Frank had his first brush with the law. He was arrested in the Bronx for assault and robbery. The charges were dismissed.
You could see that he was a very sullen, tough kid. And there really was no marked difference between the man who became known as the Prime Minister of the underworld and the others at that time of his life. He was just another hoodlum kid.
In the fall of 1914, at the age of 23, Costello married a vivacious 15-year-old Jewish girl named Loretta Geigerman. A few months later, Frank was arrested for possession of a handgun. He was sentenced to a year in prison.
After that, I don't think Frank Costello personally ever carried a gun again. He decided to get ahead by using his head instead of violence.
The third of these young Italian immigrants was Vito Genovese, born 3 days after Luciano on November 27, 1897, in Rosolino, Italy, near Naples. He moved to New York with his family at the age of 16. The Genoveses settled in Queens, where Vito's father ran a small construction business. But Vito was drawn to the excitement of Manhattan and soon moved in with some relatives in Little Italy.
Vito was a thug from get-go. He was a crook from the day he was able to walk his first steps.
Vito Genovese was a street guy, a guy who was quick to use violence, murder, the mob hit to settle an issue.
Even as a boy, Vito had dreamed of joining the underworld. In 1917, the burly 20-year-old was arrested for the first time for carrying a gun. He was sentenced to 60 days in jail. Soon after, Genovese joined Costello and Charlie Luciano's gang. At the time, the New York underworld was dominated not by Italians, but by Jewish gangsters.